Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to do a quick sound check and make sure that we're heard in Zoom. Matthew, are you available to let us know if you can hear us?
Yes, I'm hearing you very well. Thanks.
Johanna, are you good for a sound check?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
You? Yes.
Oh, good.
Okay. Chair Crandall, we are ready when you are.
All right. And I'm trying to launch my meeting, the Zoom again. I don't know what happened to mine. It just, oh, there it goes.
Sam, we do need to turn on the camera shot in the boardroom. There you go, thank you.
And the infinity camera.
Here we go.
Does seem to be there.
Are we ready? All right. Welcome back, everybody, from our lunch break. We are going to take up our next item, which is 7.3, consideration of cannabis tax reform options. And I will give the floor to CAO Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to reintroduce Patrick Sullivan, our tax administrator, a wonderful part of our admin office staff who's going to lead our presentation on potential cannabis tax reforms. And what we're seeking at the close of the discussion is not action today, but direction, so we can come back to you with the necessary instruments to take the action you wish to take.
Good afternoon, Board. I'm going to start out just with a quick refresher of where things stand now with the cannabis tax program and some of the reform and relief that's already been offered. Just as a reminder, the consumer price index increases that normally happen each year, those have been suspended for 2 years after your board previously took action. The current second installment due date for the cannabis cultivation tax was extended until May 15th, and all applicable penalties were waived. So right now, we were advised to come back and provide further options and more information, and that's what we are going to do. I have a presentation, a PowerPoint that I can share here, and just a few caveats before I present that. The numbers that are used in this are based off preliminary data from CDD. It reflects the approved square footage. And just a reminder that for each year of this program, despite what's been approved, there's been a lot of adjustments made after the fact. There are sites that don't yet have a state license, for instance, that may have a county permit. There can be other reasons why a site isn't able to use their fully allotted cultivation or may choose not to operate. So each year with CDD, there's been a process where cultivators have reduced their square footage or ultimately advised that they aren't able to operate yet. It's too early for us to have all of that data. So for now, when I give these numbers, it's based off what is presently approved as an authorized use permit through CDD and approved by the Planning Commission. But just with the expectation that it would ultimately be less. Each year, we've experienced up to a 1/3 reduction from this sort of preliminary figure. So I just want to highlight that before I start. And Mr. Chair, if it would be all right, should I present the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, so this is a presentation on cannabis tax reform, the proposed scenarios and their financial impacts. This is just some initial language from the ordinance, the Cannabis Cultivation Tax Ordinance. This is what our basis is for moving forward, particularly this 56.2, which can allow for modification, repeal, or amendment. And ultimately, the proposals that staff is presenting today are proposals that do not increase the amount of tax owed, nor do they broaden the scope of the current tax. So those are the constraints that we were working within as we were trying to adopt these different proposals and bring them to your board. So the first potential reforms we were looking at are permanent reforms. Some of these have already been raised by other speakers, and your board may be familiar with them. Changing the taxable area under our ordinance from cultivation area to canopy area. This would result in approximately a 15% reduction. I'll go into more detail on it, but it's a site-by-site basis. Some sites would incur a much larger reduction. Others, it would be minimal. The second aspect of this is to extend due dates for the cultivation tax to the following year. So this year, any taxes imposed because of cultivation activity in 2022 wouldn't be due until 23. We were proposing January and May, and we'll get into this more later. And we're also highlighting the potential need for an extension of that May 15th deadline to October. And a lot of this stems from the fact that the state's actions are not yet set. We know there's multiple proposals in front of the legislature, all of which either eliminate or suspend the state's cultivation tax, which is that it's the higher tax burden that's imposed on the cultivators. It's the much larger tax that they have to contend with. So if the state does offer that relief, that would resolve a lot of the issues, but that relief is not going to come to pass probably until summer. I've heard varying timelines on it. So the May 15th deadline we currently have for that second installment would likely not be sufficient. So we're looking at addressing that too. This is some sample figures for what a conversion to canopy area could look like. That cultivation area is a much broader definition. It includes other areas of operation where things like processing or drying, other things can be happening there that are related to the act of cultivation, but it's not the actual cultivation of the plant itself. The canopy area, there are different definitions, and I think the goal would be, we'd be looking for direction about how to bring that in line with what the state is currently doing, what CDD currently considers canopy area, and especially considering their ordinance revision. We're trying to make this uniform, and there would be a benefit both to the cultivators, because as you can see, they would get these various tax reductions. There's also a benefit to staff, because right now, depending on which program is utilizing the data, the county's tax program has to look at this cultivation area for a lot of state inspections, what CDD is often looking at when they're going out. They're dealing with canopy. So CDD, when they do inspections right now, is forced to contend with both. They have to track cultivation area and canopy area. And from that derives the tax bill. So there's multiple benefits to this potential outcome. But what you can see here, there's 4 different sites, for example, of outdoor, using the canopy area of an acre. I just thought this might be an interesting model to look at. You can see, depending on how the site was structured, there can be a sort of a radically large difference in cultivation versus canopy. On this site, if you were to make this change, it's fairly small. It's just under 7% when you reduce that taxable area to canopy. But on this site, where things are more spread out, it's a much larger reduction. So a conversion to canopy area for this outdoor site would result sort of off the top in an almost 27% reduction in tax. You can see the same effect play out with mixed light, which has this higher tax rate. Again, there's a site, site number 3, where it's a much tighter spread. So the reduction from cultivation to canopy area here, just under 17%. Look at this site, this much larger difference. It's reduced all the way from 163,000 to 90,000 square feet. So you get this much larger reduction. It's pushing 45% up towards half right here. So this is just to highlight that if your board were to consider making this change, while it's an average of 15% reduction across the board, each site is going to experience it in a pretty radically different way. When you look, if all approved square footage were to be utilized, which again, we would not expect, even though projects do come online during the year, in our experience, this number has dropped as people announce their intentions and other licensing issues pop up. So you would see this reduction from just over 15 million to 13 million under the approved square footage scenario. This is what staff's proposal on the due dates would be. It's, as far as the 2021 cultivation tax is concerned, staff's recommendation to extend that out to October 30th without penalty. That way we allow time for that state relief to come into play. I think as has been mentioned, it's the state tax that is larger. It's that increasing burden. There's also the lack of retail, which the state is looking at rectifying. They are making it a priority to get more retail outlets going throughout the state. So giving more time would certainly help on this, and May 15th, it doesn't appear that the situation would be resolved by then. For 2022 and going forward, installments would be due in January and then May. So taxes would no longer be due in the year cultivation occurred. They would be due in the following year. Hopefully this addresses some of the concerns that have occurred about people having to pay their first installment of taxes before harvest, before they've had an opportunity to get any revenue out of their site. This would help alleviate those concerns. A temporary reform that can help address the current market situation that staff's recommending is to temporarily reduce the cultivation tax rate by 50% for cultivation that has occurred in 2022 and 25% for cultivation that has occurred in 2023. There are some projections here about how it would impact these sites. Again, this is just for reference, how you can see for 2022, if there's a 50% reduction, not only would, and if that change were to be made from Canopy, it would get this further drop. So it depends on each situation, but some of them range for the 50% reduction. With Canopy included, you get reductions in this little sample we did ranging from 53% all the way up to 72%. Similarly, 25% rate reduction. If you were to include a conversion to Canopy for taxable area, you get a range from 30 to 59% just in this sample that we did. So this is not comprehensive, and there would still be more to look out, but this is just to give an idea of what could occur. A lot of the reasoning behind this, behind these proposals that staff came up with was trying to ensure that the funding obligations your board has already directed can continue to be met while still being able to offer relief to the industry and address a lot of the concerns that have been raised. So when you see what these reductions can come out to, if you were to look at Canopy area, assuming that change were to be made, there's that initial reduction of 13 million. If you put in the 25% reduction, it's 9.7 or so. 50% reduction, it gets down to 6.5 million. Again, this is assuming as though all the approved area was actually being used, but we know that is unlikely. Down here, this shows the reductions, just the dollar value reductions, just to help give your board an idea of what that would look at. So these are significant. And again, this was just measured as being as far as staff felt like we could go without radically increasing the risk that we'd have difficulty meeting existing recurring expense or allocations that have already been made. And just if it were to go past this point, our concern is that the risk of having to potentially cut funding and some of the direction already giving could arise, those odds would go up. So that's the underlying basis for how we got here. If you have any questions or want me to revisit any of these slides, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Patrick. Is there anything from the board? Supervisor Sabatier.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. I know that from the very beginning, there's been a lot of confusion from our collection of taxes to our applicants to our planners on what's cultivation area, what's canopy area, which one's which. And I would even suggest that we find when we end up, if we end up doing that change from taxing the cultivation area versus the canopy area, that some applications will not see a single bit of reduction because it was incorrectly inputted and processed. So I think that, just that confusion already, I'm on board. Let's go with the canopy. It matches with what the state is doing. We can align their license from the state with our license from the county rather than making it two separate type of views of, well, here's your dry shed, here's this shed, here's your bathrooms. It's about cannabis. It's about the actual farming and the cultivation of it. The other portions of it just confuse everybody as to, well, what are the limits? And so I think to reduce confusion and headaches, absolutely, let's go to the canopy only rather than cultivation. And I'm the 15%. Yeah, and as you stated, and I'll support that statement, it's wildly different depending on which one we're going to look at and what project we're going to look at. I know when we originally started, or at least when I started in 2019, you had a maximum of like 64,500 square feet overall for a full acre of operation. And of course, your canopy acre was 43,650 square feet. I think I said that correctly. And we extended it to go past the 64, but almost every single one of them was 64,500 at that point in time early on in the process of getting applications. And that's almost a 20 to 30% reduction for those that were utilizing those numbers. But then again, in the future, we saw more acres, and so they didn't require all the amenities to match acre for acre. So anyways, getting in the weeds on that one. So I'm all for going with the canopy versus that. It's very difficult to make a decision as to what taxes need to do without the state making any changes. So it's hard for me to speak on what it should look like as we move forward, but what my mind tells me it shouldn't look like is a flat rate. And to me, even though we're doing a percentage reduction, we're just reducing it to another flat rate, which as the pound changes on its value, whether it drops down to $10 a pound, whether it climbs back up to $1,000 a pound, that doesn't necessarily offer us some flexibility. I would like, and I'm just going to put this out there, there is absolutely data everywhere, whether it's at the metric level or whether it's at varying different levels of government that are keeping track of the price of cannabis, that we can say, hey, when the voters voted on this in November of 2017 for cannabis cultivation, that it was at this price per pound, and then make that be the dollar that we had activated the taxes for. And then whatever is the value of the pound today, we do a ratio and we drop that value on a per square footage. That way, if it increases with it, though of course we can't go above where it would be at because we can't increase the tax any further than what was approved. But if it decreases, it also decreases. I mean, somebody said it earlier, we're just going to come right back to discuss this again. Because a flat tax is not a fix, it's a Band-Aid. And so, again, I'd love to know what the state is doing. It's definitely, you're correct, and in my inquiries about it, it's sometime in July at the earliest that we're going to find out what they're going to do. But to me, a flat tax is just creating the same problem that we ended up with, thinking that the market is stable. We have to be flexible and be able to move up or down with it.
Vice Chair Scott?
I'm in agreement with going with the, changing the way we tax, going with Canopy. My question is, though, isn't Lake County one of the lower taxes comparatively to what we charge for our cannabis, comparatively to our neighboring counties? So even with that, with them reducing their rates, aren't we still lower, though? Or, I think that's one of my questions. We're already pretty low comparatively to our neighboring counties. do we need to really go that much lower?
So I can address that question, Supervisor Scott. As far as flat rate counties go, to the best of my knowledge, we are either the cheapest or at least one of the cheapest in terms of rate. It's hard to compare us to gross receipts counties. I don't really think we could get into that today. That would be a difficult analogy to make. We need more data. Other jurisdictions have offered reductions, but because their rate was higher than us, typically we are still low comparatively, or at least in the same ballpark now. The exception to that I am aware of would be Humboldt County. They shared a similar tax ordinance with us, and they did offer a reduction that goes further than what this proposal is. They granted a reduction of 85% for this year's tax, if I understood it correctly. So that's the exception to that, as far as I'm aware, would be Humboldt.
So I'm in agreement with Supervisor Sabatier. I think we need to, before we start looking at reducing our rates, I think we need to understand what the state's going to be doing, but I'm in favor of going to Canopy. So with that said, so the taxes that were supposed to be due in January that haven't been paid because we put a pause on them, they would now be then due, October, with the 15% reduction if we move forward with this? Am I understanding that correctly?
And it wouldn't be a 15% across the board. That was just an average of the change, the difference, yeah.
The one point I would raise in terms of it would be up to your board, obviously, but the direction you provide staff. But the second installment, a lot of people have paid it. I believe there's about $1.25 million that's been paid of that second installment at this point. And that was based off those prior bills, which were done by cultivation area. So we would have to, in some way, go back and retroactively adjust the bills of both those that were paid and unpaid on that second installment, if that's the path your board chose to take. So I just wanted to raise that point.
And do we have a mechanism in place that if for some reason the cultivators don't pay the taxes that were due last year, they cultivate again, and they again do not pay their taxes, that they are unable to grow the following year?
Yes. Presently, if someone has not paid their tax bill, that can be grounds for a permit revocation with CDD. So if someone were to not pay their tax bill, they could lose their permit and their ability to operate simply for having failed to pay taxes.
And so basically, if they were looking to not ever grow again, that wouldn't be a problem for someone that's just kind of like going bankrupt, if you will, and we still lose out on taxes?
To speak to that, there are mechanisms that can help us address situations like that. We're still fairly new in this, so we haven't actually encountered that situation, but I would absolutely expect that could happen, and especially given everything that we've been hearing, we probably need to prepare for that. There's tools that are available to Treasurer Tax Collector through collections mechanisms that government agencies especially are able to use. That would probably help us in trying to pursue these matters. That would be more streamlined than a lot of what's available right now. So I think that's definitely something, if your board wanted to, could direct staff to look into in the future.
Thank you, Patrick. Sorry for going that far out, but Ms. Grant, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note that your board did approve a very strong administrative penalty ordinance not too long ago that might be able to address some of that as well.
Administrative fines?
Yes.
Okay. And that also, it also includes the franchise tax board, so. Yeah.
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay, so that's something maybe we can tie into that when we are looking further into that. Supervisor Sabatier?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that is part of the conditions of approval, that you pay your taxes on time and regularly, and if they don't, then you don't meet your conditions of approval for your use permit any longer, and so, yeah, it does have that mechanism inside that area. I did want to speak about something that I completely missed on the topic of changing the dates for collection. I get it that changing the dates after the fact that somebody can sell their product makes sense. Stores don't pay taxes before you go in and buy a product. They pay as you purchase the product. But the idea of collecting it in January and May, in my opinion, is too late. Maybe not January, but May is. Because if somebody doesn't pay their May taxes, they're already planting for next season. What do we do at that moment in time? So I think that if we do use that timeline that was offered, it's going to create a debacle where, well, you didn't pay, so you need to take your plants out of the ground or you can't continue. I'd rather it be at a timeline like by the end of March, for example, or a beginning of March, that you need to have everything paid up so that the new season can be fresh and we can make that decision of who is able to continue and who is not. I think we're going to end up in some very bizarre scenarios with some people with that.
Supervisor Pyska.
I think we could ask the industry about the timing of those dates and when they feel like it would be appropriate to have these payments due. I have had this discussion with them, and I agree that in May it might be difficult to figure out who hasn't paid and who's about to plant. But we do have some industry experts in the room, and we can ask them.
With that, I think we'll open it up to public input. If there's anybody in the room that would like to come and speak on this item. Supervisor Sabatier, while they're coming up,
Just one last comment. I don't mind. I think that pushing out the taxes is one thing, and waiting for the state is very much what we need to do. But I can't help but feel like we're pushing back the inevitable. If people aren't paying their taxes today, that means most likely they didn't sell their product. And if you grew your product outdoors and you're waiting longer to sell your product because you're waiting for the state to drop their per pound cost, your product's just getting older and drier and less attractive to the consumer, which means that they're less likely to want to, people are less likely to want to buy their products. So I just think that we're pushing out the inevitable at one point or another, and I think we need to keep that in mind too, because either A, we need to recognize we're not going to get these tax dollars, or B, that we need to figure out a positive way to actually recoup what we're asking to recoup, rather than just putting people in debt and then using a tax collector to go after them.
Mr. Sullivan, you had your hand up. You're on mute. There you go.
Thank you. I did want to add one thing regarding the dates. Part of the difficulty in finding dates that we thought could effectively be proposed was capacity in the Treasurer Tax Collector's office. We need to work around some of their other deadlines, and that's partially what drove that. April obviously is a busy month, and even late March is difficult as well. December is tough. So we were trying to come up with dates that also worked around their staffing capability. So I just wanted to highlight that. It doesn't necessarily preclude any of the other options, but I just wanted to raise that awareness.
Thank you, Patrick. Mr. Durham.
Richard Durham, thanks. So on the, you're putting all that on outdoor growers, because people who use mixed light have several harvests during the year. So they could have a harvest in, March, they could have a harvest in June, they could have a harvest in September. So the due dates, I don't think, are really that important for some people, because they're making money throughout the year. It will affect the outdoor growers, because you only grow one crop. So with that. And as far as, I'm glad to see that you like the Canopy tax. If we've already paid our installment in September, does that carry over to the new year? Because we paid it on the cultivation area, not the canopy. So that was my only question.
Thank you.
Can Patrick answer that question?
Patrick, did you? Yeah.
So we did not anticipate, when we were preparing this presentation, going back and retroactively adjusting bills. It was anticipated that everything we're looking at was going forward, but that's ultimately your board's direction to provide.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kristen Callahan from Magic Meadow Farms. I appreciate the board's consideration of changing the cultivation area to the canopy. I think that that is a really wonderful proposition for cultivators, because ultimately, when I first started, I thought it was very confusing. So thank you for addressing that. The second thing I wanted to say about the taxes and the deadlines for those taxes are that I feel like I feel like I've said this before, but like when you're talking about the types of businesses that have licensing, you have vertically integrated companies and you have producer models that are just producing. They don't have drying, they don't have processing, they're just growing. And those people have to then get their product out to a fulfillment center, and then that fulfillment center would then process, package, and distribute to either retail or wholesale bulk buyers in various areas around the state. It takes time. The consideration of our tax staff that's working on this is, I feel like their timeframes are actually pretty on point in the sense of May seem late to the board, but May is actually a little bit more reasonable when you're talking about a glut and an overproduction and retailers not paying cultivators. Like, even in a successful business, even if I was able to sell all my product, I'm still waiting to get paid. And a lot of these collections aren't coming in until the following year, much later in the year. So for me, and I know this isn't going to be your favorite thing to hear, but I think in the sense of the scope of what's happening in the industry, right now we needed like a suspension. And I feel like from what I'm hearing within the state is that the state is really looking at that as eliminating at the farm, especially for producer models that are not able to sell their own products. Because selling your own products means that you have the power to set the price. At this point, when you set the price as a cultivator, you're actually not setting the price. You're beholden to a distributor and a manufacturer, and in the end, the retailer to pay you. And those taxes on the retail side are collected, and then also the distribution taxes are collected. So in the beginning, when you're producing something, you need a lot of leeway, especially in a new business that's just starting out. We all know that small businesses in the first 5 years, 50% are not going to make it. So you're correct, 50% are not going to make it. But I think you're going to see a much larger percentage of companies not making it when you're instilling these deadlines. These deadlines are really difficult when you're dealing with, like, when we went from, selling our products to having, $1,000, $1,400 a pound for outdoor to going down to $200. I just sold products for $200 a pound. $200. That would mean I would need 500 pounds to cover my costs. I realize I'm talking over, but it's a big issue. So when you're talking about deadlines and you're talking about trying to set that path, think about what it really means right now for people to plant. And we want a continued economic growth and longer economic growth, not just short-term tax revenue collection.
Thank you.
But we do have to decide on the deadlines because of all the budgeting for the county and our fiscal year in July 1st. So we do have to have the deadlines.
And from a budgetary standpoint, we already took the proposed dates in mind, and strictly from a budgetary standpoint, that works well for us.
Okay, good.
Okay. Go ahead.
For the record, I do think May would be the best for me, but go ahead.
Thank you.
Jennifer Smith,
Yep.
as I understand it, we're just answering one question, right? Best time for collection of taxes?
You could speak
You
to
could
whatever you
speak
want.
to, you could speak to any of
Conversation
these
is about
items.
taxes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then I'm not prepared for that. Tradesies, yeah.
We'll restart the timer.
So we'll restart.
Hi, mine's pretty beef, and I really am enjoying this conversation.
Erin.
It's awesome. Oh, Erin McCarrick from Clear Lake. Which I'll get to in a minute. But yes, if you harvest in October, November, and then you dry and then you cure, your crop might be ready to sell by December, January. So having something due that quickly is hard because, as was brought up earlier, There are no, and actually that woman who did the Zoom conversation about terms of payments, there are no terms of payments. I have a substantial bill due to me from a retailer. They've sold out of the product that is filled with some of these farms back here. So I owe these farms, the retailer owes me. It's been 75 days, right? And I have no legal recourse to do anything about it. So, and I know this is beyond what you guys as a county can do, because this is a statewide issue as well. But that is something to consider, is that as soon as you get that product ready to get it sold, you know, my buddy always tells me, just wait till after Super Bowl. That's usually a good time. So that being said, I had a little Oprah aha moment back there. This is to be not necessarily for this, but part of the reason why I'm encouraged about this conversation is we get the agenda on Friday and then we talk on Tuesday. So sometimes when we are, you know, animated about things, it's because it's like, oh my gosh, this is, how do we even talk about such a huge, huge topic that you guys have put tons of work into at the tax department, at the office, at the legal, at the board of supervisors. So I don't know if it's going to be decided today, but I appreciate the conversation.
From what I understand, we'll be giving direction to staff following this full discussion to come back at a later date with more of a directive from us that's more in line with the consensus, right? That what we would desire.
Right. If your board decides you want to amend the ordinance in some of the ways that's being discussed today, is we would come back with a resolution.
Okay. So I hope that helps. Ma'am?
Hello, Board. Christina, Stella Green Farms. Thank you again for your dialogue, conversation, and everything that we're taking steps forward to sustainability for everybody, farmers and county. Thank you. I just want to express my gratitude, especially for the evaluation of Canopy area. This affects me greatly. I actually have a licensed major use permit, so that's an acre canopy. That's 43,560, as Bruno noted earlier. I am actually paying for over half of what I cultivate in the area, considering that it was all lumped into a huge area. So I sincerely appreciate that, because my actual canopy area is not 43,000 and change, it's actually 19,200. So that's a significant sustainability score for small farmers. Thank you. Also, as far as taxes and timelines go, I am a full-term farm. So the timeline that Aaron just presented of October through December and then January and then after Super Bowl, those are accurate timelines, and it takes time in order to receive a return product and payment and things like that. So anything that we can do in order to decrease it and sustainability of making us all being able to continue our business operations in a fair playing ground to remain competitive with the rest of our neighboring communities that are producing is very much appreciated to go forward together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor
Price, go.
I have a question for Patrick and I guess our admin office and then all of you in the industry. Would it be, I know you have January as the due date for the first installment, but would it be very difficult to make it the month of February rather than January, so that there is time for them to sell some of the product, process, package, and sell? You can answer, Patrick. Are there reasons that wouldn't work? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I don't want to speak for Stephen Carter or CIO or anyone else in our office, but what I would appreciate the opportunity to check in on would be the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office to see how February impacts them. January was a month that was viable, and this is, there's considerable workload as more and more operations have come online, and it's been an increased burden in terms of the actual process of taking in the payments and handling all the associated reporting. So I'm mindful of that. As far as how that would impact budget and financial projections, I might see if Mr. Carter wanted to jump in.
Hello, Board. Stephen Carter. I actually don't have any concerns from a budgetary perspective, switching it from January to February. My concern would be more with the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office and their workload, if it's feasible or not. So from my perspective, that's okay, as long as I know by mid-year that something is happening.
And in that regard, the Treasurer Tax Collector...
Microphone.
In that regard, the Assistant Treasurer Tax Collector, we've been in communication with her. She couldn't be here today, but she has been a part of our discussion process, and we can certainly follow up with her when she returns. And also, Anita clarified, I want to correct a point I made earlier. We'd only bring you a resolution if we were bringing forward a resolution of intent. If you give us more specific direction today, we can just return with an amended ordinance.
Okay.
Skip a step.
So I just want to turn it back over to you all in the audience about what a difference January to February would make. And we can continue to look into it.
Supervisor Sabatier?
I'll wait till after public comment.
Okay. Jennifer?
I was going to wait till full discussion.
This is
Because I feel like we're kind of in the middle, but so I'm just going to jump in.
Yeah.
And hopefully, if I need a minute or two later, you'll grant me that. Speaking as an operator and not as part of the LCCA, so I want to make that very clear that I'm speaking for myself. Other counties do have a quarterly collection, and I think that that works well. Whatever that quarter looks like, I mean, if we're really busy, if you're really busy in March, then maybe that's not optimal, but perhaps we just say it's collectible every 3 months. Not that everybody isn't an adult, but some people need help budgeting, and that, say, $50,000 bill hits people a little more shockingly than a $25,000 bill. Additionally, after year one, you're cultivating and harvesting year-round, or not year-round, but every year. Like, it's not, I'm going to catch so much heat on this. But this isn't if you're in year one, it's really tough, right? Like, your first sales are that January, February. It's tough to pay that tax bill. But if you're in year 3 or 4 or 5, you've been an ongoing operating business with income coming and going. So I feel like if you can offer some support and changes to a first-year operator, after that, the business should be on their feet and consistently getting income. And I don't know if that makes sense. I'm going to catch heat on it. But it seems like if you could help the first year and then you're off to the races and you've got money coming in, it should be feasible to pay your taxes.
You would think so, but that's why we're in the situation we're in right now, where they couldn't pay their taxes, and a lot of them weren't in their first year.
I'm not talking about rates. I'm not talking about rates or any of that. I'm just talking about, like, the question was, when should the payments be due? And so I just feel like quarterly would be a big help.
Thanks. Supervisor Sabatier?
So I will say it before public comment is over, because I was thinking the same thing, is, look, let's have a philosophical conversation about what taxes are. It's kind of rude to make somebody pay for something that, 1, they may have grown and went fallow, 2, never were able to sell, but we're asking you to pay for something. That becomes tough in my position to say that let's continue taxing that way. And how do we do that with Airbnbs? We figured it out. It's a every 3, you don't pay because you have a room, you pay because the room was used. And the excuse that I receive all the time, which I've been mimicking that same excuse, and I'm tired of it, let's forget it, is that our tax collector doesn't have the capacity to do it. Let's figure it out. It's a business. If we get a bunch of hotels coming in, are we going to say, sorry, you can't come because we don't have the capacity to take in your taxes? The amount of taxes we're talking about should be enough to be able to make sure that we collect this and do it correctly. And if we do it every 3 months on a quarterly, it does help out the business, and we can make sure that we are taxing on the things that are actually happening. And that way, that does have that flexibility. If you sell a pound for $200 or sell a pound for $1,000, you're getting taxed for the exact same percentage of whatever that gross receipt is. And so I think that we have to make a plan that's going to have longevity and make sense. Timelines, in my opinion, aren't going to make any sense at all. We shouldn't ask the industry, when is it good for you to pay your taxes? I think we need to look at, how do we deal with other businesses? We need to start doing it the same. And then my last part that I really want to hammer on is, I struggle on the amount of the changes that we're doing without bringing this back to the people. I was very hesitant to do that because it allows us to do it. But if we're going to do enough of a change, I don't mind doing a temporary change, but with a promise that we're going to put this back in front of the people to vote on, because we're changing what they originally said that we would do. And yes, there was a measure that we can reduce it, but I would feel more comfortable with the amount of potential change that we're discussing here, that this also go back to the people in order to fix this, because this was created during a luxurious time of being able to cultivate cannabis and run a cannabis business, and that is no longer the case. And I think that those two things, taxes are taxes, we should try and deal with it in a tax way, and this was a tax measure that the people voted on, and if we're going to change enough of it, we should probably put it back in front of them.
And I don't know if you were first or...
Oh, mine's still up.
I just have a clarifying question. We were told that the assistant tax collector isn't available to come to the meeting today, but I see that the tax collector is on our...
Is she here?
Well, no, she's on our agenda. She has an agenda item today. Is she not available for that item either? Or?
Patrick works most closely with the assistant on this, and she's out of the office today.
So, but the tax collector herself wouldn't be able to maybe help us?
Patrick, would the tax collector herself be able to?
I think she may be able to answer questions regarding what the workload of the office looks like in February, but as far as specifics to the cannabis tax program, that's probably more effectively directed towards the assistant treasurer tax collector, since she's been working on the cannabis program. But if it's regarding the workload in the office, the treasurer tax collector may be able to weigh in on that.
Did you want me to reach out to her, Supervisor?
Well, we're talking about, the capacity of quarterly compared to 2 times. I mean, I think it would be a good idea if we could understand if that's even feasible, but I'm on the same sense as Supervisor Sabatier. If somebody's wanting to pay taxes, we should be there willing to receive them regardless of when it is.
So, well, I think they'll reach out. Yeah, at the best of our ability. And with that, in the meantime, I'll go ahead and go on to the next person on Zoom, and then I'll come back to you, sir. Nara Dalbaka, you are next. Can you please unmute? And you have 3 minutes.
Absolutely, thanks. Hi again, Nara Dalbaka, District 1. We keep talking about the state here, and I appreciate the county availing me of my AB 361 ability to testify by Zoom today. You do not want my 3.5-year-old running around in there during the meeting. So thank you for that. And on state bills, there are several that have been introduced. Some of them are revenue neutral and some of them are going to be more impactful. And I know that the county is saying that that you want to wait to see what happens with the state. I think the county should do a little bit maybe more than that. In the past, the county has sent letters or weighed in when there's legislation that materially affects them. I think it's fair to ask the state to step up. The county is doing their part. You're discussing it right now, doing your part to help this industry. You saw that bar graph in Jen and Aaron's presentation that showed it's pretty much 50-50 for local and state in California. So there has to be a reduction at both places. If they're passing bills that don't actually make any impact on the final cost to the consumer, then they're not actually doing anything. And I think that it's really important for the county to take a deep look at the bills as they move forward and move through the four different tax bills that are happening. And so I would say don't just sit and wait, but track and lobby, please, because the state does need to do the hard work that you're doing. And I know it's hard, but you're going to help us grow up high, and we're going to show that we can work together creatively to actually make this a sustainable source of income for the state and for the local jurisdictions. So yeah, again, appreciate you taking all this time today. It's really uplifting to see. So as a constituent.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner?
Michael Wagner, I just guess I'll follow up a little bit on Bruno and everything he had to say. I think all of that makes a lot of sense when you're talking about taxing and basing it on what you're selling, as opposed to just this broad spectrum page that you're saying, okay, well, here's the area, so you should have collected this much, but you didn't. Taxes are really based on income, right, coming in. So it makes a lot of sense to view it differently, and then that turns into a much, much bigger conversation about how it gets taxed. So while I definitely agree with Bruno, maybe that's a longer conversation. The May date for taxing, just to keep things simple, I would say May for somebody who's going through the process. February really puts you on your toes. As Aaron went through and explained, by the time it's been processed, gotten ready, contracts have been made, it's been moved out. So October, you're taking it down, November, you're curing it. So you get to December, January of having it processed, and it's going to all these different companies or all these different steps, which again, all take time. So we're into January, just getting it trimmed or processed, ready to the point to go to distribution. So January, February, your distributor is taking your product, putting it into retail, right? And then you take a couple of months to finally get it into retail and back out. And, you know, I've dealt with paying vendors from a retail point, and one of the things that was really important was that you pay your vendors, otherwise they quit supplying you, right? So that's one side of it. The other thing is, if you're not able to get paid, it's not that there is no mechanism, there is, it's a court, you know? So if you can't get paid, then you could potentially sue them to get your payment for whatever you drop to them. But again, all of it takes a little bit of time. So I think leaving that cushion up through May or maybe even a little bit past would be really necessary as far as functionality of everything. In reference to the canopy tax as opposed to the cultivation area, I don't think that you're necessarily reducing taxes, you're just redefining the taxable area, right? So to Bruno's point, you're not changing what was a voter initiative, right? There was a voter initiative to make these laws. So without overstepping the bounds as the government, I think that changing that canopy area, that doesn't really affect that. And like temporary changes for short term, again, are Band-Aids for what is a short term, because if Bruno is right and the market stays down, then these temporary changes would only be good for so long, and then you'd be right back to hot water, right? But in that time frame, then you could bring something or have something brought forward to be voted on. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I see that the tax collector's on. Should I just continue on?
Yes, thank you, Barbara Ringen, for joining us. Barbara, there you go, thank you. Do you have audio as well? Can you just test your speaker? You're on mute.
There we go.
Thank you, Barbara. And
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Supervisor Scott had a question for you, and it pertains to a discussion we're having about possibly delaying the timing for receipt of cultivation taxes in 2022. And what staff has proposed is that the first installment would be due on January 1st, delinquent January 30th. And what's come up in discussion is this: what if it was the payment was due on February 1st, delinquent at the end of that month? How would that impact workloads in your office?
The current secured tax bill, the second installment, is due February 1st. It is delinquent April 10th, so our workload does start to pick up the beginning of February. Also, what we would hopefully maybe like to see in the future is moving our tax sale from May at the end of the fiscal year more in line to where it was in the past, which was generally February, because it's that in between first and second period collection for the current taxes. So it's not critically busy, but it is a time that we do pick up in our workload.
What if it was quarterly installments?
Depending upon when that hit. I'd like to also talk to Liz about that, because she's been the one that's actually been producing the invoices, and I'm not sure, I wouldn't want to speak without asking her about that first. I know there's a lot of work that goes into that process.
Supervisor Scott, did you get the answer you were looking for?
I did, and I think quarterly, if we're struggling with capacity right now, I think quarterly, will just double the amount of work and invoices, correct? I mean, I know it'd make it easier for the grower, but it's going to impact our departments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Supervisor Sabatier?
How do you process Airbnbs and TOT?
That's quarterly.
No, but how do you process it? Like, what is the process? Do they send it? Do you send them a bill because you don't know what they've done? So they send you a quarterly amount and tell you what kind of business that they've incurred. And granted, we have the ability to audit those things, or how does it work? If you can provide some description and detail of how you do that, because I don't see how it would be much different than that.
Sure, it wouldn't be different, but right now TOT is processed through our megabyte tax system, which has simplified the process quite a bit, but we do send out quarterly returns, and they return the quarter return within 30 days submit their payment. So that is processed quarterly. And then that would mean if the cannabis was done quarterly, then that would probably be a conflict, with that also. But again, TOT is processed now through megabyte, so it's much easier to process the returns, to mail them, and also to process the payments when they do come back in.
And Megabyte is the system that you're using? Is that what Megabyte?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Megabyte property tax system, yes.
Okay.
And cannabis taxes are done in cash, correct? So it wouldn't, or is it, or could we use a system to be able to do that, or not able to do that?
I'm not familiar with a software program that handles that at this point, Patrick, but we currently create our own bills.
I'd be able to speak to that. I don't believe Megabyte has a program that handles cannabis taxes. There are software programs that do manage cannabis tax. I've had some experience with them when I worked in another jurisdiction. It is tough to implement one of those programs until you know how your program's going to be set, because you're gearing up for either a flat rate tax like what we have, or a gross receipts tax. Typically, gross receipts taxes are paid on a quarterly basis. So the experience I've had would be if you were running cannabis taxes through a gross receipts model, there are programs that exist that can help you process it. And that's typically when you would see quarterly payments. And at least in my experience, tax programs that run on a gross receipts on an income basis tend to do quarterly reporting, as opposed to other models like the current cannabis tax or property tax, where it may be broken down into 2 installments or 1 annual installment. So that's what I'd say. There certainly are software programs out there that, like how Megabyte assists with processing TOT, there are programs that assist with processing cannabis tax. Cash payments still remain, I think, a bit of a burden on staff. I know just because you tend to have to do appointments, there's a lot of work that goes into those, as I'm sure the Treasurer's Office can attest.
Supervisor Sabatier?
And I'm just going to stand by my belief that, for example, last year we took in approximately $9 to $10 million. I don't think excuses or reasons not to do something that makes more sense from a business perspective of what have you sold, what have you done. That I don't think that's the way that we should be looking at that. I think we need to look at, it's a business. How do we do this for the long term, like we've been doing with other businesses? If we could figure out how to get sales tax to automatically go to the state and then come back here, I'm pretty sure we could figure out how to do that here as well. And again, with $10 million coming in, I just don't see how that's an impossibility. I get it that there's efficiencies, but any new thing has efficiency issues. And I think that we need to look at what is the long term, not the short term. Not who's in what position, we need to request that it be done right. And I think, in my opinion, that is the best and most right way to do that, because that's what we already do with most of our other businesses.
All right.
Mr. Chair, you do have well,
Yeah,
you
we
have
do.
at least one hand up in the,
And I think we have two people waiting in chambers as well. So I'll let this person go on Zoom, and then I'll come back to you two as well that are in the chambers. So Michael Colbruno, you have 3 minutes.
Great, thank you. This is Michael Colbruno. I'm with Ghost Dance Ranch in District 1. And first of all, I just want to thank, for people who think government doesn't work or care. Staff actually took the time to join LCCA at a visit at our farm to actually kind of see, what canopy, versus acreage look like. And it was a really good discussion. So I just want to appreciate that. So for people who think government's not working for you, they're actually going out of their way to try to see the situation firsthand. But I want to reframe this in stating that this entire conversation in the state, in the counties, and at the cities started because of the illicit market. And this was the discussion we saw in the presentation earlier. And all you have to do is look at what's happening in the state, and this is all related to taxes. A couple years ago, 60% was illicit, 40% was licensed and taxed, and now we're at 80-20. And the revenue numbers from the state are showing this huge drop. And the reason that drop is happening is because taxes and regulation. This is what's driving it. So chipping away at the tax, which is what I'm hearing in this discussion, is not going to stop people from going back into the illicit market. What I wanted to show during that farm visit was I showed farms that are for sale, including right on Jerusalem Grade, where I live in District 1, farms in Kelseyville, farms outside of Lucerne. I mean, every part of this county, people are putting their farms up for sale. So one of two things are happening. Either people are going to get out of the business, or they are going to go back into the illicit market, which means it's going to be untaxed, it's going to be unregulated, you're going to have no control over water, there's going to be no water board registration, illegal diversion will happen, right under your nose, you'll have nothing to do about it, there'll be no inspections. So when we talk about taxes, this chipping away, this 15%, this little bit, does nothing. And the other thing I wanted to show during that farm visit was that you're taxing product that's rotting in pots, that's stacked up in containers unsold. Imagine if you had tomatoes or walnuts or wine and you were taxed on the product that didn't go to market. I mean, big ag would be showing up in droves at your Board of Supervisors meetings screaming at you. This is why, I'm speaking personally here, I'm a proponent for the gross receipts tax. Tax what is sold, and when we do well, the county does well. When we have a rough year like this year, then the county comes along to try to say, we're going to help you, but you don't have to pay on what you didn't sell. So I would just really ask for a pause here, to rather than push something through, maybe not make a recommendation, say if you don't have to, and really say, what is the impact if we just chip away? Because I guarantee you, people who are in crisis, first-year farmers, are not making the decision of whether I want to pay, 15% or 20% reduction. They're making major decisions because they are going broke. They're selling their farms. They're borrowing money. So this is a drastic measure that's needed here. And I would just ask the board to really take pause of what's really happening in the market and why we're seeing this dramatic shift into the illicit market. And I would point to a call that was with state legislators where Nancy O'Malley, the district attorney of Alameda County, said high taxes equal high crime. And she points to the fact that what we just saw outside of Lucerne is the drug cartels are back after a decade. And they're back because of high taxes and people being driven back into the illicit market. So thank you for your time. I really do appreciate, I think staff and the board is taking this very seriously, but I just want to make sure you remember this entire tax conversation is framed around not having people go back into the illicit market. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Damian Ramirez.
Yeah, Damian Ramirez from Lake County Grown. First off, thank you for all the thoughtful consideration of everything and the opportunity that you gave LCCA today to present. As far as the canopy, I agree with the canopy calculation, putting in place instead of cultivation area. I'm glad to hear that everyone seems to be on board with that change, as we're the only county or municipality that I know of which assesses cultivation area. So a big resounding thank you to everyone involved with hopefully making that important change. As far as tax reduction goes, I know there was a question about other surrounding counties and how much taxes there are. The wonderful presentation that the LCCA did earlier, they identified not only our neighboring county, Humboldt, which reduced their taxes to 15 cents per square foot of canopy. Calaveras reduced theirs 60%. That brought it down well under $1. I think it was about 80 cents. And then Mendocino, under certain circumstances, gives entire relief, and that's done on a case-by-case basis, and they've done that from the inception of their ordinance in 2018. So obviously these are some pretty wild times that we're all experiencing, so I could see them doing that for a couple growers this year, if not a large amount of them. With that said, I'm just asking for parity with these other major producing counties. I think it's in the best interest of Lake County and the residents and the ultimate tax revenue that generates. Obviously, we talk about the grand scheme of things, tourism and things like that, but really just giving us a fair footing with Humboldt and the other surrounding counties, I think is very important for the overall industry in Lake. And lastly, and I feel most importantly for the sake of the cannabis industry, is how to deal with the second installment for this past 2021 growing season. I recognize that we've said that they've suggested to push it off to October. I just worry that that is simply putting off the inevitable for many farmers that I personally know, and many farmers that have come to tell their stories to the board as well over the last couple months. Simply put, if this second installment is not eliminated,
your comments, please.
Many farms were going to go under, and all those future taxes from those operators, they're going to be foregone, and we're never going to see any tax revenues from those operators. And where are they going to go? We know where they're going to go, where Michael just mentioned. A lot of them will go back to the illicit market, straining our economy and straining our water and straining our environment. And I think it's in the best interest of everyone, really, really, to forgive those second installment and let
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez.
continue on. Please, thank you.
Sir, in the chambers, you're next.
Michael Donegan. Excuse me. Well, it's getting more and more complicated with all different angles that we can attack a problem that is obviously a problem. I believe right now what we need is something that can help the industry and something that can be done in a very, very short time. We need to know exactly what we have to pay and when exactly, because we have to start budgeting. This is number one. Number two, I'm absolutely for a canopy for now, because that seems to be the easiest way to at least get some relief or some help. And then maybe afterwards, I don't know, maybe discussing it. One more thing is about the point that Jennifer said, giving release to the first year operators, because everybody will have enough money to pay. In business, there is one law that is very, very vastly overlooked, and it's very short and up to the point. It says, in business, grow and get more efficient or die. So what that means is, in the first year, you're not going to be absolutely where you have to be in order to compete. You have to evolve, which means basically that you have to have a lot of new capital investments to stay with the trend, and where you have to stay to be efficient, to have your prices at a point where you can still make a penny for yourself. I got my license, it was number 4 or number 5 in the county back in 2018. and I still have not had the ability or opportunity, or I don't I can't find the right word, but basically I still have not been able to put on aside a penny, because everything goes back, put this one, redo this one. It is always, it never ends. It's a capital investment all the time. So operators that are in the 4th or 5th or 6th year might have even less money than the people that starting right now have investors. So that is one point that I just want to make. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tired of hearing me. Hi, I'm Kristen again. I wanted to speak to what the gentleman just said here and many others have said, which is that unfortunately in a new business, like what Bruno has been saying, which I really appreciate, thank you, and Jessica and the other board members understand, is that we are basically in a crisis right now. We could potentially talk about all these tiny little reductions here and there and deadlines, but the truth of the matter is that most of these businesses, even the ones that are successful, are going to not plant again. They're going to be gone. And I do believe that the Prop 64 legislation was really designed for larger scale corporations, not the smaller businesses that are part of the community here. And I think that we can see the future, but in the moment, I do believe that gross sales and a structure that's designed for collecting taxes based on the revenue you're bringing in is a more realistic path forward. And then to speak to the tax office, Liz, I was one of those people that had to make an appointment to pay in cash because Cannabis doesn't use banks. Because it's just a lot of money and banks don't want to work with us yet. So it's not federally recognized. So what I want to say is that if we did do the quarterly tax concept on gross sales, like Jennifer spoke of, it would also reduce those appointments and the amount of cash that you're bringing into to Liz at the tax office to make these appointments. So we can adjust and maybe find a different way, a system to collect our revenue. And since we are bringing in so much and there are so many businesses that are up and running in cannabis, so we should be able to, maybe hire some new staff. I don't know, but I do believe that the economic long-term benefit in our county is really about supporting the family operators that are here, that were in the very, very beginning getting licensed, following all the rules. And just to speak on one thing that I want to say about regulation, the red tape and the regulation last year for my farm, I planted something called autoflower. It's a seed that isn't photosensitive. It completely goes right into flower, and I had to tag 26,000 seeds. They hadn't even sprouted yet. It cost me $10,000 in labor just to tag every single seedling that never sprouted, and half of them weren't viable. So $10,000 I could have been giving to the tax revenue went to spending money on keeping up with the regulatory system, and I could have put into my bank account. I don't know any grape owner, any other agricultural crop where they have to tag an individual plant the way that we do. And these regulations are actually the reason that we don't have a lot of extra revenue to spend towards our county, which is where I would like to put my money into parks, schools, education, and art centers, and all kinds of stuff. So I feel like making a stand, eliminating the taxes for this year, and then going to a quarterly gross sales tax would actually benefit the success of our community.
Thank you. And how many are repeat or have already spoken once? Have you spoken before, sir, on this item? Okay, yeah, come forward, please. Yeah, I just don't want to put someone in front of you, someone else that hasn't had a chance to speak, because I've done that a couple times and I apologize. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Tyler, again, from Kelseyville. You guys are probably sick of hearing from us so really, I think it's great to try and move forward so we don't have to keep wasting your time. I think just a couple things, Bruno, what you said was spoken like a poem. It was beautiful, thank you. And there has to be an existing model, I think, somewhere in some business that we can use an analogy to find the most simplified solution for your staff. And let's get you guys the taxes, because it sounds like we're saying we don't want to pay taxes, which I don't think anybody wants to pay more than their fair share, but let's figure out an efficient way to do it. And then a couple things throughout the discussion today kept coming up about the state. What's the state doing? We've got to make sure we're, and I think I spoke with Supervisor Pyska about this. The industry had Cecilia Aguirre Curry, the assembly member for this district, come up, and she did a visit with us. Very, very open to working with your board. I mean, extremely at the state level, like anything Lake County needs, like we can just call Cecilia and she can get it done. For whatever you guys need at the state level, like she's there. And she's like the one for agriculture. Like Gavin calls her for ag stuff. I don't know, I'm like beating a dead horse with the food and ag stuff, but like producers, farmers, that's where we need to be. I know we can figure it out from an existing analogy and we'll make it work with what we got. Cecilia is the ticket at the state, and we talked to her about working with you guys. She's 100% on board to help with whatever Lake County needs. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else on Zoom that has their hand up, so I'll go ahead and close public input if there's not anyone else that has anything to say. All right. Supervisor Pyska.
So I definitely agree that we need to be moving to Canopy. If we wanted to look long-term planning to a gross receipts model, I think that goes beyond the spirit of what the voters approved, and that would be something that would need to go back to them. But we could make the change to Canopy now. I appreciate all the work that's gone into the 50% and 25% reduction, and it sounds like that's probably where we need to go, but I'm also uncomfortable with making these changes while not knowing what happens at the state level. So I don't know when we have to make that decision. I guess that's for us to continue to discuss. I think we have consensus with moving to a Canopy, but
The Canopy? So
with the reductions.
Yeah, with the reduction.
I'm still unsure. I know we can do it if we have to, and we could suck it up, but yeah, Anita, thank you.
Go ahead, Anita.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that, I realize you know this, but you can make a change to the ordinance with regard to Canopy, and if you determine to do so, you can always come back and make another change, as long as it falls under the umbrella for the modifications in the existing voter-approved ordinance. So if you want to give direction on Canopy today, it doesn't foreclose you from making other changes later. It's just, this would be the first one.
And so it's sounding like the direction might be Canopy, and it might be extend the payment dates either in the manner we have proposed or slightly changed based on the discussion here today, after we can have a more comprehensive follow-up conversation with the assistant tax collector.
My only question for the Canopy or the item 1 is how would this fit in, if it would fit into the presentation that CDD is going to bring to us, or could this, or does this fit in with what County Council had stated? We can change it and then change it back if that conflicts with something that we decide there.
Well, one of the things when you change to Canopy that will have to be done is there's going to have to be a review of every place else in the zoning ordinance where cultivation area shows up. As opposed to Canopy, sometimes it might be all right, in other cases it won't be. But that's going to have to be done in any event. I don't think that the tax ordinance, because it's just in, or the cannabis ordinance, because it's just in draft, I think that's a relatively easy adjustment to go to. So I don't think that should present any concern. I don't think it will slow it up at all. So I think you can move forward that way. At this point, again, if Canopy, and if you want to change the payment date, you can do that. You can do that permanently or temporarily. That's the discretion of your board. And again, if there are other things that you want to do, if at some point you want this to go to the voters in a different kind of environment, you You can direct staff to do that as well. So you have a number of options. You just don't have to take them all up at the same time, was my point.
With the voters, that discussion, when we're talking about bringing it back to the voters, is that in regard to sales receipts or something, gross receipts? Or is that what we're talking about if we go to that measure? And I heard Supervisor Sabatier say that if we went that route, am I hearing you correctly, Supervisor Sabatier, where if we went that route, you would want to go back to the voters?
I don't, Ms. Grant would be able to respond better than me, but I think that the tax measure allows us to decrease the tax. I don't know that specific ways of decreasing it are alienated from our ability to do so, but I think that if we do change it enough, it would be ethical to just put it back in front of the voters, because now we're really starting to play around with something that was entrusted for us to do.
Ms. Grant?
Yes, the ordinance as it exists does speak to those modifications, but it also speaks to the overarching purpose of the ordinance, and the voters have spoken to it. So it's certainly a reasonable position for your board to take, that any additional, especially permanent substantive changes, could go back to the voter and do so in a more comprehensive fashion. This original ordinance was done at a completely different time, and the laws were not nearly as strong or clear as they are now, so it's quite possible if your board determines to put something to the voters, it could have a degree of specificity and clarity that you haven't had before.
Thank you for that. So, did you finish? You got to finish?
I finished.
Okay, and then I don't know who was first. Vice Chair Scott, go ahead.
And for me, right now, the only thing I'm willing to move forward is just changing for Canopy, waiting for what the state's going to do. Because if I can remember correctly, the last time we had this discussion, the state's tax payment was the largest burden for our cannabis growers, and they said that they would be able to pay their local taxes if that state burden was lifted. So I think we really need to wait and see before we make any other changes of what the state's going to do, because we may be able to just continue on with how everything is set up.
Are you talking about item 1 for the Canopy, or are you talking about for item 3?
I'm talking about just doing Canopy for right now and waiting for the state to see what they're going to do, because if they lessen their burden, we might be able to continue, is my thoughts on the matter with how we have things set up.
Okay, thank you.
And we would still have the May 15th tax payment due deadline upon us, so you'd need to consider
moving that one, Todd, the number 2.
Well, I think if she said we're waiting for the state, that automatically means that we'd have to postpone that until we figure out what the state is doing. I'm assuming that's what it sounded like what you were saying, Vice Chair Scott.
I wasn't thinking about the dates, but I was looking at changing anything else in our ordinance, not wanting to do the 50%, 25%, because that may be feasible for them to be able to pay if the state burden has been lifted off of them. I don't know if I'm
So the October payment would work for you, or do you want to keep it in May?
I don't know.
Well, we were going to have a dialogue with the assistant tax collector anyway about timelines in their office and how adjusted payment dates will work for them. So that can certainly be part of what we bring back for your consideration after we know more.
Supervisor Sabatier, I think, well, first, Ms. Grant had.
Oh, I was just going to say that if your board wants to make the adjustment to Canopy, and because admin's going to be speaking to the deputy tax collector about this issue, a draft ordinance could come back to you with it could be a question of alternatively either a deferral of the May date until October or maintaining it, but the language for Canopy would be ready to go. And by that time, your board will have the benefit of the information from the tax collector, from the deputy director, so that may assist you in making a decision. But that'll keep it moving forward.
And that's more exactly where I kind of want to keep things going, is just moving. Supervisor Sabatier, I'm sorry.
So I'm going to make a comment, and then I want to speak of what we're doing moving forward. And the comment's not going to be taken very well, but I think we really need to slow down on almost the feeling of a threat that if we don't do something, it's going to go back into the illicit market. That plays right in the hands of people who don't want to see you here in the first place. And we need to figure it out, but that just feels a little too much. We're going to do whatever we want to do. No, we got to work together. We're part of a community. We want you to exist. We want you to survive. But we also don't want to hand out things that we shouldn't be handing out. That's why I think that even if we decrease the tax today for 2021, they still have the tax from the state at the same time. So whatever we do for 2021 today means absolutely nothing in comparison to the state tax that they'd have to pay. So I think we do nothing for 2021. We postpone until the state does its thing so we can figure out what kind of burden are we looking at on the local area. And 2022 is what I think we need to look at for, as was suggested, the canopy. I don't think the canopy, going down to the canopy, should impact 2021. I think we really need to split and separate how do we move forward and how do we deal with yesterday. And I think dealing with yesterday cannot be done without understanding exactly what the state is doing, and also where we stand as far as everybody who's paid and who hasn't paid. Where are we? I know that Mr. Sullivan mentioned that 2.1, I believe, around that amount, 2.1 million has been paid for the second portion, but where are we when we discuss this again around May or when the state makes its decision if it happens to be around July? I'll just leave it at that, but I agree with the movement forward, and I just really think we need to look at those two different items. How do we move forward? And while I agree with the canopy, I still think in the long run, to be able to fluctuate with whatever the market does, canopy or cultivation area, doesn't matter. It should just be every 3 quarters, the gross receipts, just like we do with receiving our sales tax from the state, just like we do with receiving our TOT from our Airbnbs and our hoteliers all around the county. Eventually, we need to figure out how to marry those two processes together, because we're still ending up taxing something that may not have been sold, and that to me is a very awkward tax and becomes very, we originally taxed the entirety of your use permit, which made no sense, because are we forcing you to do your 1 acre, or are you choosing to do a 1 acre? And so we decided, tell us what you're growing and we'll tax you on that. But eventually, if you're not selling something, it becomes that much, it becomes mean. You don't tax something on somebody who's in a failing industry or a flailing industry that can't even afford to survive, let alone now pay the same taxes that we're asking you to do. So I'm okay with going canopy, but in the long run, I really think that gross receipts is the way to go.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and we can take that time and do that really well and make sure that we have the capacity and the initiative is well written, and we do it the best we can, and we know that we can't do that quickly.
Okay. I'm fine with moving with the extension date for October 30th, that whole thing, with the other two. If we're just looking for some draft verbiage to come back, I'm okay with that. And I do want to wait before making a decision on the 50%, 25%. I don't want to move on anything sooner than later and then come back. The state does something totally different, and, you know, we threw 80 pitches and we could have just thrown 40, you know, so. All right, so do we have direction there?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I would like to just run through it so I'm sure we're understanding.
Please.
What you'd like us to bring back is an action item whereby you would switch our methodology to canopy going forward, not retroactively. And we would just extend the current payment date to October, the payment that is due in May, or would we push forward the payment dates as staff recommended permanently, making that a permanent change, until you change it again, of course, but.
Making October a permanent?
What we proposed at the start was that it's
January.
due in January and May.
Or possibly February.
Yeah, or possibly February, depending on the conversation with the assistant tax collector.
So I'm okay with pushing to October, although I do see that it is possible that some people could end up in a real hole. But, I mean, that's business and it's their responsibility. I'd like to look at February, if that can work with the group.
We can bring you like plug-and-play options.
There we go.
Yes, alternatives, they're just built into the ordinance, and your board could select from among them or none of them.
But no % increase at this time. Is this, what you're talking about now gets you to the point that hopefully you know what the state is
Right.
doing before your cultivators are on the hook for their next payment.
Right.
Correct.
Supervisor Sabatier?
And there's only one thing that's unfortunate, and I guess the state gives us no opportunity to be able to really move forward appropriately, and that is by the end of March, people need to know what they're going to be doing for this business, and at this moment in time, it's kind of left in limbo. So I'd like to see if we can have that discussion come back before, not as early as possible, but maybe by the mid-March, early April, late April, to really have a conversation about taxes again, just because I think we're creating, again, right now we're talking about the second payment for last year, and eventually we're going to be talking about 3 separate payments because some people chose to keep going, and what do we do with that? The state makes it very difficult.
Right.
Because I don't want to match Humboldt. We don't have the fog. We don't have all that kind of messy stuff that makes it for a bad climate and temperate zone for that. So I don't think that we're an equal to that. I think we're much better than that. But at the same time, I don't want to set something that's so low that we lose out and then the state changes everything and we're kind of looking a little dumb.
Well, I think we owe it to our residents, our taxpayers, and our voters. But are we going to have more information in April?
If the conversation is short, the conversation is short, but at least we might be able to provide a little bit more information about what's going on with the bills, which one seems to be growing legs, which ones have been shut down. It at least provides a little update on what's going on. It doesn't have to be a decision day, but I think that I would like to at least attempt to see if we can have better clarity on what our next steps would be.
I would suggest the end of April, just to give us some more time. And then if we need to send letters, if there's one that we feel like we can back.
And like I said, mid-April to late April, I'm okay with that. I think it's getting close, but
Because we're already mid-March.
I know, well, I'm going to be gone in mid-April, so I want to be here for that conversation. That's why I'm hoping maybe the 26th. I'll be gone the 19th. So, April 26th?
Mr. Chair, if I can just clarify.
Yes.
The ordinance with regard to Canopy, you want back sooner than April?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So that could probably come back on the 22nd of March.
Okay.
Okay, and your further discussion is the one you're talking about in April. Thank you.
All right. Are we clear? Are we on a good path? All right. With that being said, thank you for the discussion. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, public, for your comments and for the dialogue. It really helps. And I hope you didn't feel as if, I know one of them said, hey, I know you're tired of hearing us. No, we need to hear it at times because we hear a lot of different things and sometimes we don't get to hear your voice. We're about hearing everyone's voice. So thank you. So next item on the agenda.
Mr. Chair, if you felt inclined to take up the North Shore Fire Agreement, the chief has been here and waiting
here he is.
patiently. And if you're ready for that, Susan Parker will come in and present that item.
So item 5.3, approve North Shore Fire Protection District Wildland Fire Fuels Crew Grant Agreement for the purchase of equipment for an amount not to exceed $521,779.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While the folks are shifting, hopefully Susan Parker will come on in. Here she is. Hello, Susan. Come on, Susan, you can just use the standing mic if you'd like. And
Sure. Oh, come on out.
great. Susan, you'll need to be in front of the microphone, though.
I know, I want to ask a question first.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want a short presentation, or should we just go to
the discussion part. What would you prefer as a board?
What do you prefer?
Personally, I pulled this for two specific questions. I think the program has a lot of merit, and I don't personally need a presentation. I don't know if the rest of the, how the rest of the board feels.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement, just the questions that you need clarification.
I think we just go to the questions.
Okay. So I had two questions. One was the reporting section of this said that we would get a report on January 8th, I believe, of 2024. This would start as of today if it was approved. And there's a fire season. Unfortunately, that's never ended, I don't think, from last season. But anyways, we've already seen fire activity. We will continue to see fire activity throughout. There's going to be some work for the mop-up. There's going to be some work with the mitigation, hazardous mitigation for the vegetation work, and other things like that. I'd love to get one. I don't know if the year was wrong and we're supposed to get one in January of 2023, but to wait all the way to 2024 to see what was done and the success of the program. I want to know, do we want this again in 2023 because it ends in March? I don't want to find out until January of 2024. So that's why I was hoping to kind of reel that in. I don't want to do it every 3 months, every 6 months. I don't want to put a whole bunch of bureaucratic mess in your wheelhouse for the stuff that we're asking you to get done with this fire crew. But I think it's important to know before the next fire season starts, what was the success and how can we support this if there's a need to continue supporting it.
Yeah, hello.
We have cannabis taxes to be able to start this conversation.
Yeah.
Well, you have them
Go
now.
Yeah, I can report as often or as little as you want. I do want to, I've been thinking about that. I agree with you, we need to do it sooner than 24, and that's fine with me. I would like to update that. Some of the factors you put in there for reporting might be kind of tough. Acreage is a hard one. Just because of topography, size of crew, etc. But I know that both Supervisor Simon and Supervisor Pyska sit on the RA, and I update them monthly on everything that's been going on with the crew. We are going to have a slow start. I mean, we're starting a brand new thing. I've never had a hand crew or a fields crew before, so I myself am learning. And but I'm willing to report whenever you want it. Every 6 months is fine with me, or to the RRA board, and they can report back through that committee. That's easy.
And I'm personally just fine with once in the year to give you your time to get everything done. If the RRA wishes to present earlier than that, but I just thought 2024 was a little far.
A little far, yeah, yeah. I don't remember seeing that actually, but that's okay.
That was just for the final grant report, you know, how the money's been spent, what they've done in that entire time. So additional reporting is, as long as he's willing to do it.
Do we need to add that into the agreement? Do we just? Okay.
Yes, we would need to add a line to the agreement that, Susan, maybe you can propose some language since maybe you have the agreement in front of you.
I do.
So it would simply need to say something to the effect that North Shore Fire will report annually. Do you want that report in paper, or you want a presentation, or what's the preference?
I'd love to see you here and have a presentation so the public could be aware of it. That's my personal opinion.
I think I'm fine with that.
I agree.
Yeah.
Supervisor Pyska, you had your
I know that we'll have monthly reporting at the RRA, and I think that's appropriate and fantastic. And I think a January report, because that's kind of, we're definitely through fire season. We're kind of halfway, hopefully, through winter and wet season. So it would be great to see you then. We always love to see you.
Well, I get to see Chief at all my town halls, so it's fun.
Yeah.
Supervisor Spud.
And so I still had two more things. One is also it says here under performance measures, and I couldn't find it anywhere else, so it's kind of strange that it's in performance measures, but it says fuel crew will coordinate with Community Development Department, Code Enforcement Division to clear brush and fuels from risk-identified areas and conduct prescribed burns where appropriate within the county. Now, I get it that we do hazardous vegetation check-ins and have violations, and those can be shared. but I don't know that, like, we're very reactive versus proactive. I think that, to me, the fire crew is about being proactive. And I'd like to, and I don't know, I need to have the conversation, I'd like to add the RRA in there, because I think the RRA has with the work that they're doing with the CWPP, the fact that they're just knee-deep in this conversation about fire mitigation, I'd like to allow our code enforcement division to maybe grow in this specific role of being a part of the fire mitigation outside of just our normal violations, and that the work can also come from the RRA, where they have specific high-risk areas saying, hey, this hasn't burned in a while, we're really worried about this area, where it might not be a violation that our code enforcement triggers. And so I don't want them to be the only lone party that, it just felt like a lot on our code enforcement at this point in time.
Can I?
Supervisor Pyska?
So we can put the RRA in there, but we're in the process of building out the Fire Safe Council. And the Fire Safe Council, a countywide Fire Safe Council, will have this responsibility, will have hold the responsibility of the CWPP. So it's not there yet, but that's where this collaboration should be.
And if we add the RRA, the Fire Safe Council is at the RRA at this moment in time, correct?
No, I mean, they're different. So there is an organization called the Lake County Fire Safe Council, but it doesn't have capacity. So the RRA has capacity. The RRA is all risks, and so it should be focused on all risks, delegating out programmatic work. So by next January, the Fire Safe Council should be built for what it needs to do. So if you were looking for putting language in, you could put the RRA and the Lake County Fire Safe Council.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, could we also have Ms. Parker speak to why she worded it as she did with the involvement in code enforcement? Because there was some planning involved. So before we change it, could we hear that?
And actually, I'm gonna defer to the chief because.
So this was part of my idea. A couple of things. One is I've talked with Supervisor Pyska about the $100 fee that was assessed to the Riviera port areas that, what I'm told, and I don't know that for a fact, but a lot of work hasn't gotten done. And the work that has gotten done has been very expensive because they've had to go out to bid, they're paying prevailing wage, and things like that. With my fuels crew and being a government entity, don't have to do any of that. Just turn the work over. And so it's much quicker, much faster to get the work done, and much cheaper, quite honestly. And that not only a code enforcement issue, but it could be public works. We could we could work with public works on clearing evacuation routes throughout the county. So that's where kind of my mindset was when I offered up, we'll work with code enforcement to speed up their process and get some of the work done quicker than they would the normal vendor route, if that makes any sense.
And Susan, then you took the conversation to the code enforcement manager. Can you get to the microphone?
He tried, we're playing phone tag.
Yes, I did speak to Mr. Beltramo initially during our initial discussions in January, and then I reminded him of those discussions yesterday, and he's very excited and on board and sees this developing, just like you said, Bruno, into a bigger and better and more comprehensive process.
Ms. Grant, you want to discuss?
Oh, yeah, only that in terms of adding in the RRA or anybody else, the agreement itself is between the county and North Shore Fire, and you can't just add independent bodies. So there'd have to be a process where the RRA would agree to be a signatory to the agreement. It'll have to be adjusted to do those things because, well, for obvious reasons, you wouldn't want one of the cities to start adding the county into participatory documents just arbitrarily.
So it's staff's recommendation that you go with it as proposed, and there was some thought that went into it.
Yeah, okay, and so, and North Shore Fire and the county are both members of the RRA.
Yes.
Supervisor Sabatier?
Yeah, and part of my concerns was it did not seem like community development was up to date on what exactly their role would be, and I just wanted to see what else was available to make sure and guide us, because I want to make sure to provide you the right tools and the right destinations for where the best impact would be. And my last question is, I believe I know where it's coming from, but there's nothing in here that says where the money is coming from in our memo or in our agreement. If we can get that so the public is aware and so that we are aware where these funds are coming from.
Are we waiting for an answer?
Yeah, those are all,
We're amenable to those?
yeah,
The-
we're
the
talking
staff's
about
amenable to
two
those?
revisions, the one you already took note on, and then you can just put in a whereas
Yes.
that addresses the funding.
Okay.
And so it'll just basically spell out where the funding, the $521,000 came from the discretionary funds from supervisors, and then the other portion came.
It's a mixture of
Right.
cannabis discretionary funds and then regular cannabis
Right.
funds.
Okay. All right. Are there any other comments or
Nope, that's it.
questions?
I just want, I want to add something, obviously, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I've been one of the more vocal chiefs on there with Supervisor Pyska about the CWPP. There's a lot of projects on there. They're not shovel ready, but they're projects that have gotten started. We're still probably 2 months out. I have 5 people for the fuels crew we're interviewing tomorrow. They're probably all going to get hired, quite honestly, but that's happening tomorrow. Our large equipment items have been purchased. We don't have them yet, but we had to buy them because they're still in the Pacific Ocean somewhere. But
Hopefully not at the.
so we ordered them up, but when they do come in, that was your guys' purchase, and I would like to make sure that we get that partnership with you and, you know, a little promo thing for everyone when that happens. I'm already working on projects. When Carrie's already reached out to me about her project she's been trying to do since I came to work for North Shore in 2014, which is make Spring Valley Road from the store to the highway and a safe evacuation route. She's already talking to me and finally feels like she might have an avenue if we can jump some of the legal hurdles for, you know, going on trespassing on people's property. So,
I'm sure Ms.
so
Grant
we're
is
working
plugging
on
her
it.
ears.
Well, we know who it is. We know who it is. But we have to get all of those permissions ahead of time, and that's what's going to take some time and hopefully not slow this down. We've partnered with Clerk to do some of that work for us and do some of the grant work for us because I'm not experienced in that, but they are. So I've been working hard at all the partnerships that I can do to make this thing just run smooth as we can. But again, this first year is probably going to be kind of up and down as we learn how to do it. But I'm super excited.
I love what you brought in front of us, or what we have in front of us, and absolutely am in support of it.
Thank you, Chief. All right, I'm going to open up to public comment. I don't see anybody in the chambers with public comment, and I don't see anyone online with their hands up. So we'll bring it back to the board for action.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve North Shore Fire Protection District Fire Fuels Crew Grant Agreement for the purchase of equipment and an amount not to exceed $521,779.
With amendment for
With
reporting.
amendment for?
Reporting.
For reporting.
And clarifying funding source.
And clarifying funding source.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Johanna, please conduct the roll call.
Okay, Supervisor Sabatier.
Aye.
Supervisor Scott.
Aye.
Supervisor Pyska.
Yes.
And Supervisor Crandall.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
He feels like we do.
So let's see here. Let's go on to item
Mr. Chair, if you wanted to go back to 5.9, I believe I can speak to the minor
Okay.
change that caused that to be pulled off the agenda.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
also, I've been advised that I need to ask your board to go back and reopen 510 for a moment. There is an error in the dollar amount for the late travel claim to be paid that the department has called our attention to.
Okay, so I'll read
You have to
item,
reopen the consent agenda to do that.
So moved.
okay, so I have a motion
Second.
and a second to reopen the consent agenda. Joanna, conduct roll call, please.
Okay. Supervisor Sabatier?
Aye.
Supervisor Scott?
Aye.
Supervisor Pyska?
Yes.
And Supervisor Crandall?
Aye. And so we'll go to item 5.10.
Yes, sir, I can just state
Yeah.
it very quickly.
Go
As
ahead.
you'll see in your agenda, the dollar amount of the late travel claim is listed as $224.28, and the department advises that the correct figure should be $228.28. And Johanna, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that is the figure. Is that right? Well, in the email I have, it appears to be right.
And, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It is what is on the travel claims itself. It
Right.
does say 228.20.
I noticed that too.
Thank you.
Okay. And so we're just looking to correct that. Open it up for public comment. I'm not seeing any hands raised in the Zoom room or in the chamber, so I'll bring it back here for action.
Mr. Chair, move to approve a late travel claim for Water Resources Program Coordinator William Fox in the amount of $228.28 for the Western Groundwater Congress Conference held in Burbank, California, and authorize auditor to pay.
Second.
We approved this separately because it
So I have a motion and a second. Joanna, conduct roll call, please.
Okay, Supervisor Sabatier?
Aye.
Supervisor Scott?
Aye.
Supervisor Pyska?
Yes.
And Supervisor Crandall?
Aye.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I move to approve the consent agenda items 5.1, 5.2, since we reopened all of them, 5.4 through 5.8 from the consent agenda.
So I have a motion
Second.
and a second. Joanna, conduct roll call, please.
Supervisor Sabatier?
Aye.
Supervisor Scott?
Aye.
Supervisor Pyska?
Yes.
And Supervisor Crandall?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, item 5.9. A, adopt resolution recognizing, endorsing, and accepting the technical and financial support provided to Lake County by the Northern California Coalition to safeguard communities in an effort to address criminal activities associated with the illegal cultivation of cannabis by drug trafficking organizations. And B, adopt resolution amending Resolution 2021-115 to amend the adopted budget for FY 2021-22 by appropriating unanticipated revenue in the Sheriff Corner Budget 2201.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so what happened on this one, and I will note that Mary Beth Strong is here in the Zoom. If I get this wrong, I hope she'll help me get it right. But what happened on this one is that when your agenda originally posted, the one of the two resolutions required a change which occurred later. And so apparently a change was requested from the Auditor Controller's Office, which I'll show you in just a second. It was a minor change. But staff then posted the corrected version of the resolution yesterday. So some members of the public might have looked at the original resolution because that was what was posted over the weekend. The corrected resolution, if you look at your screen there, you'll see what was corrected. It's relatively minor. It's the B of this agenda item, but there was just a minor language change. And I see that Mary Beth's in here as a participant. Did I get that right, Mary Beth?
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you. So again, really minor change, but since it did change from the original that the public may have viewed, we wanted to illustrate that for you.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you. Any questions
you.
from the board? Open it up for public input. Not seeing anyone in the room, obviously, and then not seeing any hands raised. So I'll bring it back to the board for action. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt, I offer a resolution, I offer the first resolution of Part A.
Resolution's been offered.
Okay. Supervisor Sabatier?
Aye.
Supervisor Scott?
Aye.
Supervisor Pyska?
Yes.
And Supervisor Crandall?
Aye.
Thank you.
And I offer resolution of Part B.
Resolution's been offered.
Okay, Supervisor Sabatier?
Aye.
Supervisor Scott?
Aye.
Supervisor Pyska?
Yes.
And Supervisor Crandall?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. So that brings us to our next item, which would be 7.4.
The Barbara Ring and the Treasurer Tax Collector is still in the Zoom
Okay.
if you wanted to skip to 7.5.
Yeah, let's go to 7.5. Discussion of interest apportionment with the Treasurer Tax Collector. And so with that, this has been brought by Supervisor Sabatier. I'll give the floor to you before we start.
Thank you very much. We had talked about our investment pool in our first quarterly report that we have received for quite a long time. And during that conversation, there was a discussion about the allocation of the interest into our account, into our school board's account, and into our fire district's account. Those are the partners that we have in our investment pool. And during that conversation, it was revealed that we had not submitted the allocations for the fourth quarter of 2021, so that would be April through June, and the first quarter of 21-22, which is from July through September, and from quarter two of 21-22, which would be from October to December, and that all three of those had not yet been allocated to our partners in the investment pool. We were told that it would take about 2.5 weeks to get that completed, and we said, please get that done by March 1st. Let's have a conversation. I emailed Ms. Ringen on the Thursday before March 1st, which I'm going to just venture a guess that was probably the 25th or the 26th. Of February, did not receive a response, showed up and asked her on March 1st, and was told that it would take another 2.5 weeks. And it has been, and at this point in time, I'll stop and pause and ask Ms. Ringen if that is still the case or if that has been accomplished, the allocation. And you're muted.
Yeah, you're on mute, Ms. Ringen. There you go.
I apologize. It has not been completed yet, but it will not, I don't believe, take 2 to 3 weeks. We did do partial. The interest deposits have been done. Now we're in the process of reconciling everything so we can actually do the posting of the interest apportionment. We did have something come up unexpectedly right at the same time that I mentioned we could have it done in 2 to 3 weeks. We have an employee on our tax division who accepted a promotional transfer to another division, another department in the county. That leaves then just one employee, full-time employee on our tax side. So we have been busy trying to bring things up to date for that employee to leave, and also to make sure that it ran smoothly after that. So we've been a little bit strapped for time, but I do apologize. It was not my intention to go past that, but at this point we have been partial, and I don't believe it will take much longer than maybe to no later than the 17th. So I'm working on the reconciliation now, and it should move smoothly, hopefully after this, now that we've had that transfer.
Okay. And the quarter four allocations, typically you would have a 15-day window that you can go ahead and get that all processed and submitted over to our partners. So if we use July 15, 2021 as a potential deadline for when it should have been allocated, we're 236 days behind schedule in getting our fire districts and our schools, including ourselves, the county, those funds. We are March 8th, so 4 months from now would be almost exactly a year. From the first quarter of 21-22, we are 144 days behind because October 15th would have been the date that typically that's when the allocation would be made. And for the second quarter, which would have been done on January 15th, we're already 52 days behind. So the loss of a person in the staff is something that occurred just recently, which doesn't provide much context in why we're still 236 days behind. My question that we need to resolve is how do we make sure that this doesn't occur again? There's a new payment will be due at the end of this month, so April 15th is when a payment will be due to our partners. And I want to know how are we going to resolve this problem where we're not always looking so far in the past. We need every dollar that we can get, our schools need every dollar that they can get, and we're holding on to it. And there's something wrong with that. We have to be able to fix and solve this problem rather than keep reoccurring the same exact barrier for people to, our partners to access their financial their financial funding to make things happen. And so I'd like to know if you have suggestions on how we're going to make this work. And just to let you know, on April 15th, or at least as close to that date as possible, I will be putting this back on to check in and see where we are, because it feels like we need to have that continuous discussion. But I'd like to know what is going to be done to make sure that we can have that positive relationship with our partners where they can get their funding in an adequate timing.
Okay. Well, I would appreciate the opportunity to meet with admin right now to find out what resources are available to us, if not permanently, temporarily, to get us through this time period, especially now that we are having the tax sale in May, and we only have the one staff member in tax that will be working with that. So if that's possible, I would like to meet to discuss what resources and support we can get from the county to get us through this, and then also follow up with that.
CEO Hutchinson?
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. We're happy to meet with Barbara and Liz, or however she would like to have that meeting. As she knows, even though we're having, I believe we're having improved recruitment outcomes in recent months, it still takes time to get staff on board. And so the question I would ask Barbara, it might be faster to look to the form of contract support. And because I'm not an expert in her field, I would not know what potential resources there are in that area. Barbara, do you know of contractor resources that could support your work?
The assistant and I have talked about this, where we could reach out. So we have thought of
or perhaps
retirees
from other counties, or
yes, to see what would be available to us. So that is one of our options that we are working through. We've had even just recently another failed recruitment for the accountant, and I believe we have accountant recruitment out there, and also our accounting technician recruitment again. So we have been trying, but unfortunately, for one reason or another, we have not been able to bring anybody on board yet. So, but we are searching, yes.
Okay. Is there any other questions? Do you have the direction you need?
I would ask, since you said approximately 9 days, I believe you stated March 17th is when you're going to have that accomplished. Please communicate that with us, because other than my finding you at your office, there was no communication to let us know if this was getting accomplished, as we had discussed during our public meeting last time regarding our quarterly investments. If you can reach out and let us know, because it's important that, and I'll just be candid and say things that might put us in hot water, but there are conversations happening at our school districts to pull their funding out of our investment pool, and that's the last thing I want to see is us losing their partnership. And so we have to do better than what we're doing, and we need to have that level of communication to understand where we are, rather than finding out at one point that we're 200 days behind on getting something done. So please communicate and let us know that that's been accomplished or not. Okay.
All right. CEO Hutchinson?
Supervisor Sabatier, when did you want to continue this item on a
say April
future agenda? I
15th?
want to make sure I've noted that.
Well, depending on the communication we get, it might need to come back after the 17th. But at this moment in time, I would like to have that discussion on March 19th, April 19th, to check in and see where we're at with the third quarter, I had to think, third quarter of our allocation to our partners.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll go ahead and open this up for public input. I don't see anybody in the chambers, and in the attendees, I don't see any hands up. Is there anything else to add while I bring this back to the board? No? I think we have an understanding, and we'll be looking at this further, and we'll be looking out for some communication. Ms. Ringen, thank you very much for being with us, and we look forward to getting this resolved. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Item 7.4, discussion and possible renegotiations of certain provisions of agreement approved on September 28, 2021 with RCH DC. Discussion and direction on audit for financial activity regarding loan and loan forgiveness regarding Collier Avenue project. And Supervisor Sabatier?
So this is, again, a conversation that's happening over at the Oversight Board. Last Monday, I will let Ms. Grant provide greater detail, but they did have discussions to kick this back to the Housing Commission. Housing Authority is where the assets are located at this moment in time, and so we are the Housing Commission, or at least we plus an additional Housing Commissioner. Right. And so that will most likely return to us to, again, revise certain provisions of the agreement in order to be able to meet the expectations and requirements of the Oversight Board. I will hold back on any further details other than what Ms. Grant provides to you based on the discussion that was had yesterday. But they're going to be looking for us to make some changes, going back to the Oversight Board to approve those changes, and then I still want to make sure and keep open the potential for the audit, as I have not seen still anything to calm my concerns that I have not been able to identify the money that came in and the money that came out.
Ms. Grant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The overarching satisfaction here is less with the Oversight Board approval of language and more with the responsibility to ensure the protection of housing assets. And in 2012, all of the county as successor agency, the former redevelopment entity for the county, all of its interests associated with Collier were considered to be housing assets and were duly transferred to the Housing Authority. That included loan receivables as well as other interests. The community redevelopment law itself, which was decades old prior to being dissolved, had a massive focus toward the development of affordable housing and using tax increment for that purpose. When redevelopment was scuttled and determined that it would not go forward, the law still made provision to protect affordable housing, and that's why one of the allowable transfers of these assets acquired through redevelopment were allowed to be transferred to a housing authority so that the use for affordable housing could continue. So that's the overall backdrop that informs this discussion as you go forward. The provisions that I presented to the Oversight Board yesterday Seems like longer, but it was just yesterday.
It's a long week, and it's only Tuesday.
I know, it's okay. Was to add a provision that in the event the housing authority would obtain ownership of the Collier Avenue property, should there be a default of a type that's described here by RCHDC, that the housing authority would covenant that it would use the property for residential occupancy by low-income and very low-income households. It went on to also strengthen the provision that in the event of a default by RCHDC and a demand by the housing authority, that the RCHDC would convey the property, the Collier Avenue property, to the housing authority for $1. The RCHDC would also agree to a covenant in the agreement that the property would be used solely for low-income and very low-income affordable housing, which should include persons suffering from mental disorders or substance abuse disorders who are at risk of becoming homeless. The default provisions were specified in terms of exactly what events are going to create default, which would be a breach of those covenants, insolvency, assignment or attachment, suspension or dissolution of RCHDC's right to do business, or that there would be liens on the property or the development that the housing authority didn't approve first in writing, or the failure of RCHDC to meet the obligations that relate to its use of the property and its covenants, to continue to use it in that way. The remedy, again, would have been, in addition to specific performance under the agreement, would have been to allow the housing authority to acquire the property Collier for $1. The reasons for that are given more specificity in terms of the housing authority's significant responsibilities, its divestment of certain rights and entitlements, all to effectuate the goal of the agreement and bring affordable housing to fruition. So that is also done. The remedies are cumulative. Again, the point of all of this is because the Oversight Board back in 2012, with certain conditions, in a way that's a little interesting, divested but still maintained some level of control. However, it doesn't change the nature and character of these assets as housing assets, and nothing in their March 2012 orders would have done so. So the question is whether the agreement can be improved essentially to protect further these housing assets, to ensure that the project goes forward, or at the very least that the assets would be then taken by the housing authority to ensure that hopefully some project would go forward. In the event that nothing can happen, which is a very remote possibility, and the property would have to be sold, any monies recouped could be returned back through the Oversight Board to the taxing entities. But that would be a very rare occurrence because, again, the point of having the housing assets is to use them. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the law, both during the community redevelopment years and upon its dissolution, was very intent on protecting the use of monies for affordable housing in California. And Lake County certainly has a severe need for such housing.
So with all of that said, we need to bring it back to you sitting as the Board of Housing Commissioners, with the Resident Advisory Board member sitting with you as well.
Yes, I'm not, my presentation wasn't for you to comment, it was just to let you know status, but these will be the issues essentially that will come back to you as the Housing Authority Board.
Thank you. Supervisor Sabatier?
So at this moment in time, my original reason for bringing this was due to some concerns on the agreement that we had signed that said that we had approval to forgive the loan. The conversation, and again, my main concern was the taxing agencies have funded this in the first place and wanted to make sure that they were being protected. The conversation, the way it's happening right now in the Oversight Board, is accomplishing exactly those things to make sure and protect those taxing agencies, and that if by chance we end up having to sell the property, that they end up not losing, that they can get things back, maybe not entirely, but that they would be able to get compensated their funds that they contributed. And at this point in time, I would suggest that we don't need to see this again on the agenda until it comes back to us as housing commissioners to review the new agreement. But I would request that the Part B come back simultaneously. And I think that and Ms. Grant will let me know if it's the best way to do it, that one would come back under the guise of the supervisors, not the guise of the Housing Commission. So that would probably be, Part B would be a separate agenda item attached somewhat right after the fact that we go over the Housing Commission agreement.
Ms. Grant?
It could also come back under Housing Commission. So that
wasn't
would
sure.
be up to the supervisor putting it on the agenda, Supervisor Sabatier, but an audit could be called for by the Housing Commission or by the Board of Supervisors.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the board? Open it up for public input. And I don't see anybody with their hands up in Zoom, so with that, I'll bring it back to the board. And what do we have, no action taken, right?
The direction is, things are already moving.
They're moving, got it. Okay, with that, I think that covers every item on the agenda, except for close. So
We made it.
we made it, closed session, I'll read those off. 8.1, Public Employee Evaluation, Health Services Director, and 8.2, Public Health Employee Evaluation, Public Health Officer. With that, we'll go into closed session.
I have a question of the board for this.
Yes.
I would love to have a evaluation and conversation with both these folks, wondering if we would like to wait until Supervisor Simon is with us, or if we want to have that conversation today. We did pass a policy that it would take all 5 of us for evaluation. I'm just putting it out there. Happy to have the conversation.
Right.
I was operating under the assumption that you did want to see them, that these early conversations were important, and so I've asked them to wait around all day, so, but it's up to you.
Yeah, I think we need to touch base with them.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll
And so
go.
Mr. Portney would be coming in person.
Okay.
And we'll bring or Dr. McLaughlin in via a separate Zoom invitation.
Excellent. With that, we will go into closed session. And thank you very much for staying with us if you're still there. All right.